I've heard a lot of hand wringing about how this whole situation was completely unforeseen, like we discussed last week. That's utter nonsense. In the big picture, there have been wise men, and you could find them. They're among us now, who warned us about this and other wars, and these wars would be a direct consequences of our national actions. If you are unaware of this, you should look into it. And also in the micro, this particular case, in the surprise of last week, uh, that's nonsense. There's so many red flags that went up. It's almost a miracle that the entire country wasn't destroyed. And the only question was whether this was bizadon allowed to happen or criminal negligence. And we should let the Beis Din decide when the appropriate parties are brought to trial after their arrest, God willing. Rabbi Bar-Hayim spoke many years ago. This is one of the first things I learned from him. The Meir Kazarov massacre was back right in Adar 2008, if you remember. And they said that the poor children who were murdered then died al Kiddush Hashem. And Rabbi Bar-Hayim said, no, it's actually not so true. They died, it was a Chilul Hashem. Kiddush Hashem was when a person actively and knowingly gives his life in order not to transgress the commandments of the Torah. The best Kiddush Hashem is a person who refuses to, let's say, worship idols. He'd rather die than worship idols. That's a Kiddush Hashem. And the second Kiddush Hashem is living according to the Torah. But the Chilul Hashem at Merkaz Rav was that those children were unguarded and left to be murdered. The Chilul Hashem was that the Jews let their guards down. That's a Chilul Hashem. It's not that the people who died in battle and were murdered, there's nothing wrong with what they did. They're innocent victims. But that's not Kiddush Hashem. That's a Chilul Hashem that we allowed it to happen. A very important point that should be made again in these times. The redemptive process depends on repenting and on a national level. It is not sufficient for somebody to just be what? A question there? No. It is not sufficient for everybody just become an Orthodox Jew. By the way, that's a situation described in Maseches Yoma. Tesam Beis, Gemara wonders. By the way, I'm not saying that there's unanimity among the sages of the Talmud and the Rishonim what brought about the destruction of the Second Temple. I'm just trying to say that there's a statement there in the Talmud that says, "Mikdash sheni shayu oskim b'Torah v'mitzvos u'filas chasadim mipnei machlorev mipnei shayta bo sinat chinam." That is, we could get to the stage where it was like the ends of the Second Temple times. Everybody was keeping the Torah, oskim b'Torah mitzvahs. They were filas chasadim. Imagine if everybody was a perfect Jewish city here in the land of Israel, or I wouldn't say in Chutz La'aretz, because Chutz La'aretz they don't keep the Sheva mitzvos, and they're not being they don't keep the mitzvahs atulis v'aretz. So imagine if everybody was entirely a Bnei Brak or another entirely Jewish city. That wouldn't be good enough because we still have infighting. We have to repent on a national level. And what does that mean? That means we have to run a government that's proper. That means we can't have infighting every time there's an election. That means we have to expel from our midst the political class who keep us fighting with each other so that we don't pay attention to the bigger picture.